While most people assume Africa's leaders glide effortlessly across borders, the reality is far more complex. African officials are often entangled in bureaucratic hurdles, facing more scrutiny and travel headaches than many tourists, even as the vision of seamless pan-African unity remains just out of reach. Recent reports reveal that even high-ranking diplomats are sometimes stranded at airport lounges, their status offering little protection against red tape. Before we dive deeper, let's pause for a moment. If you're watching this, you're already part of a community that believes Africa's story should be told from within, not dictated from outside. Every time you subscribe, like, or share, you help amplify these essential narratives, break down stereotypes, and build a space where real issues are debated and understood. Your support means more voices, more perspectives, and a stronger platform for change. If you want to see Africa's complexities explored honestly and boldly, hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let's keep this vital conversation alive. Let's unravel the paradox at the heart of Africa's diplomatic travel crisis. The African Union's Agenda 2006-3 sets out a bold vision, a continent where borders dissolve, where leaders and citizens move freely, and where a single African passport unlocks opportunity from Cairo to Cape Town. Yet, as recent data from the Lago Collective and the African Union itself shows, the reality is starkly different. African leaders, presidents, diplomats, and high-level officials often find themselves stuck at the very borders they are supposed to transcend. In the last few years alone, at least a dozen African leaders and representatives have been denied entry to another African country, sometimes left waiting in airport lounges, their diplomatic status offering little protection against bureaucratic inertia. This is not just a matter of inconvenience or bruised national pride. It's a symptom of deeper, systemic friction that undermines the entire project of African unity. The dream of a unified Africa, where leaders can collaborate face-to-face without barriers, is being held hostage by a tangled legacy of colonial borders, fragmented policies, and administrative bottlenecks. To understand how we got here, we need to journey back into the origins of Africa's borders and the forces that shaped them. The story begins in the late 19th century during the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. European powers, with little regard for the continent's complex tapestry of ethnicities, languages, and historical ties, carved Africa into a patchwork of artificial states. These borders, drawn with straight lines and blunt instruments, split communities, divided families, and created new nations overnight. The legacy of those decisions still haunts Africa today. Modern immigration systems, visa requirements, and travel protocols are built atop these colonial foundations, often forcing African leaders to navigate a labyrinth of rules that were never designed to foster unity. Observers note that these artificial borders did more than just redraw the map. They entrenched a mindset of division where each new nation prioritized its own sovereignty above collective mobility. After independence, African countries inherited not just the lines on the map, but also the legal and administrative frameworks that governed movement across them. Instead of tearing down barriers, many states reinforced them, wary of threats to their hard-won autonomy. The result? A continent where the idea of pan-Africanism is celebrated in speeches but undermined in practice by a patchwork of visa regimes and security protocols. Visa reciprocity has become a recurring nightmare. While European and North American officials often enjoy streamlined access to African capitals, African leaders themselves face a dizzying array of requirements when traveling within their own continent. Some countries demand advance visas, others require hefty deposits or letters of invitation, and a few even impose outright bans on officials from neighboring states. The impact is not just symbolic. When a high-profile official is left stranded at a border post or denied entry to a summit, it sends a chilling message about the state of African integration. Recent reports highlight the scale of the problem. In 2024 alone, African countries collectively lost over 60 million euros in rejected Schengen visa fees, according to Lago Collective Analysis, a figure that underscores the broader mobility crisis facing the continent. But the pain isn't limited to Europe. Within Africa, officials and citizens alike face some of the world's most restrictive visa policies, with only a handful of countries offering true visa-free or visa-on-arrival access to all Africans. The rest maintain a patchwork of requirements that make even routine diplomatic travel a logistical ordeal. The bureaucratic bottleneck is not just about paperwork, it's about the absence of a centralized authority to issue and recognize diplomatic passports across the continent. While the African Union has launched its own diplomatic passport initiative, the rollout has been slow, uneven, and fraught with complications. Each member state retains the right to determine who qualifies for a diplomatic passport, how it is issued, and what privileges it confers. There is no single continent-wide system for verifying credentials, sharing biometric data, or ensuring that officials can move seamlessly from one country to another. This decentralized chaos creates opportunities for confusion, delay, and even abuse. Security concerns loom large, with countries wary of opening their borders to officials from states facing instability, conflict, or political upheaval. The administrative burden of issuing and recognizing a continent-wide diplomatic document is immense, requiring not just legal harmonization, but also technological investment in secure, interoperable systems. For many countries, the cost and complexity are simply prohibitive. The African Union's Agenda 2063 is supposed to be the answer. Launched with great fanfare, the AU passport was envisioned as a game-changer, a single document that would allow leaders, diplomats, and eventually all Africans to travel freely across the continent. But, as of today, the initiative remains largely symbolic. Only a handful of countries have fully embraced the AU passport, and even fewer have integrated it into their border management systems. The vast majority of member states continue to rely on national passports, each with its own set of rules, restrictions, and bureaucratic hurdles. Observers point to several reasons for this reluctance. First, there is a deep-seated fear among some governments that open borders will lead to uncontrolled migration, security threats, or loss of sovereignty. Second, the technical infrastructure required to support a unified passport system, biometric databases, digital verification tools, secure data sharing platforms, is still lacking in many regions. Third, there is a lack of political will to cede even limited authority over border management to a supranational body like the African Union. The result is a continent caught between aspiration and reality. The AU's roadmap for passport integration is filled with missed deadlines, stalled negotiations, and ongoing debates about the balance between national interests and collective progress. The COVID-19 pandemic only deepened these challenges as countries tightened border controls and focused inward, further delaying the dream of free movement. But the consequences of restricted mobility go far beyond diplomatic inconvenience. They strike at the heart of Africa's economic and political future. The African Continental Free Trade Area, hailed as one of the most ambitious integration projects in recent history, depends on the ability of leaders, officials, and entrepreneurs to move freely across borders. Without this freedom, trade remains stifled, investment opportunities are lost, and the continent's collective bargaining power on the global stage is diminished. Recent data from the African Development Bank shows that intra-African trade remains stubbornly low, accounting for less than 20% of total trade on the continent. One of the main reasons is the difficulty of moving goods, people, and ideas across borders. When leaders themselves struggle to attend summits, negotiate deals, or oversee projects in neighboring countries, the ripple effects are felt throughout the economy. Labor mobility, knowledge transfer, and market access, all essential ingredients for growth, are hampered by the same bureaucratic barriers that block diplomatic travel. The soft power implications are equally profound. Africa's ability to shape global narratives, build alliances, and assert its interests depends on the mobility of its leaders and diplomats. When those leaders are grounded by paperwork and protocol, Africa's voice on the world stage is muted. The continent's relatively modest position in global soft power rankings is not just a reflection of economic disparities, but also of the practical constraints that limit diplomatic engagement. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, these mobility barriers have a direct impact on Africa's ability to influence international decision-making and to participate fully in global governance. To understand the scale of the challenge, consider the technological and administrative barriers that stand in the way of unified travel documentation. Over 550 million Africans lack official identification, making it nearly impossible to verify credentials or issue secure passports. While 85% of African countries have national ID systems with digital capabilities, millions still fall through the cracks, unable to access essential services or participate in cross-border travel. Biometric systems, touted as the future of secure identification, are in place in 49 countries, but their implementation is uneven and interoperability remains a distant goal. Even where technology exists, the infrastructure to support it is often lacking. Internet access is expensive and unreliable in many regions, limiting the effectiveness of digital border management tools. Low digital literacy further complicates the adoption of new systems, while reliance on foreign vendors for biometric technology raises questions about data security and long-term sustainability. The administrative burden of harmonizing immigration laws, integrating databases, and training personnel is immense, especially for countries grappling with political instability, economic disparities, or ongoing conflict. The human stories behind these statistics are both sobering and illuminating. Take, for example, the case of a high-ranking official from West Africa who, despite holding a diplomatic passport, was detained for hours at a neighboring country's airport due to a paperwork discrepancy. Or the East African delegation forced to cancel a crucial trade mission after being denied entry visas at the last minute. These are not isolated incidents. They are the lived reality for many African leaders, diplomats, and officials who find themselves at the mercy of a system that was never designed to facilitate unity. But the impact is not limited to the corridors of power. Ordinary Africans, traders, students, entrepreneurs face similar obstacles when trying to move across borders. The youth, in particular, are acutely aware of the barriers that stand in the way of their dreams. Surveys show that only 37% of African youth are optimistic about their country's prospects, a figure that reflects not just economic challenges, but also the frustration of being locked out of opportunities by bureaucratic red tape. For many young Africans, the promise of pan-African mobility is not just a matter of convenience. It is a lifeline, a chance to pursue education, find work, or reconnect with family across borders. The African Union's Free Movement Protocol, adopted in 2018, was supposed to ease these restrictions, but progress has been slow. Legal and safe migration within Africa remains the exception rather than the rule, and the barriers to entry are often highest for those who need mobility the most. The consequences of restricted movement ripple across society. Economic growth is stunted as entrepreneurs are unable to access new markets or form cross-border partnerships. Knowledge transfer and innovation are hampered by the inability of experts and professionals to collaborate in person. Even access to healthcare and education is affected, as students and patients struggle to navigate a maze of visa requirements and border controls. Observers note that the opportunity cost of slow integration is immense. Africa's population is young, dynamic, and increasingly connected, but the continent's potential is being held back by outdated systems and entrenched interests. The dream of a borderless Africa, where ideas and talent flow freely, remains tantalizingly out of reach. So, what stands in the way of progress? The answer lies in a complex interplay of historical, political, and technical factors. At the heart of the issue is the tension between national sovereignty and collective action. Many African governments are reluctant to cede control over border management, fearing that open borders could lead to security threats, uncontrolled migration, or loss of revenue from visa fees. This reluctance is compounded by the legacy of colonial borders, which continue to shape political identities and fuel suspicion between neighboring states. The technical challenges are equally daunting. Harmonizing immigration laws, integrating biometric databases, and building secure data-sharing platforms require significant investment and coordination. Many countries simply lack the resources or expertise to undertake such ambitious reforms. The result is a patchwork of systems, each with its own rules, protocols, and vulnerabilities. Corruption and governance issues further complicate the picture. Slow legal proceedings, administrative delays, and lack of transparency can turn even routine travel into an ordeal. For officials tasked with implementing passport reforms, the incentives to maintain the status quo often outweigh the benefits of change. Yet, there are glimmers of hope. Some countries have taken bold steps to liberalize their visa policies, offering visa-free or visa-on-arrival access to all Africans. These initiatives, while limited in scope, demonstrate that progress is possible when political will aligns with. The African Union continues to push for greater integration, investing in digital infrastructure, promoting best practices, and advocating for the adoption of the AU passport. The road ahead is long, but the stakes could not be higher. As Africa seeks to assert its place in the global order, the ability of its leaders to move freely and engage directly with one another will be a critical determinant of success. The continent's future depends on its capacity to overcome the barriers of the past and build a new architecture of mobility, one that reflects the aspirations of its people and the realities of a rapidly changing world. Let's take a closer look at some of the most persistent obstacles to progress. First, the issue of fragmented governance. Unlike the European Union, which has established supranational institutions to manage border policy and passport issuance, the African Union operates primarily as a coordinating. Member states retain ultimate authority over their borders, making it difficult to implement continent-wide reforms. Efforts to harmonize visa policies or create a centralized passport authority have been met with resistance as countries prioritize their own interests over collective goals. Second, the challenge of technological integration. While many African countries have invested in biometric identification systems, these platforms are often incompatible with one another. Data sharing agreements are rare, and concerns about privacy and security have slowed the adoption of digital verification tools. The reliance on foreign vendors for critical infrastructure raises additional questions about sovereignty and control. Third, the problem of administrative capacity. Issuing and managing a unified diplomatic passport requires not just technology, but also trained personnel, robust legal frameworks, and effective oversight. Many countries struggle with limited resources, high staff turnover, and competing priorities. The result is a system that is prone to errors, delays, and inconsistencies. Fourth, the political economy of visa regimes. For some countries, visa fees represent a significant source of revenue. The prospect of losing this income or of facing increased security risks makes governments hesitant to embrace open borders. In other cases, visa policies are used as tools of leverage in diplomatic disputes, with countries imposing restrictions in response to perceived slights or disagreements. Finally, the legacy of external influence. Africa's relationships with Europe, the United States, and other global powers continue to shape its approach to mobility and border management. Many visa policies are designed with an eye toward reciprocity, mirroring the restrictions imposed on African citizens by foreign governments. This dynamic creates a cycle of exclusion, where African leaders and citizens alike are caught in a web of mutual suspicion and bureaucratic retaliation. Despite these challenges, there are signs of progress. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2021, represents a major step toward economic integration. By reducing tariffs and promoting cross-border trade, the AfCFTA has the potential to transform the continent's economic landscape. But, as experts point out, the success of this initiative depends on the ability of people, not just goods, to move freely across borders. The AU's Free Movement Protocol, adopted in 2018, is another important milestone. The protocol aims to remove restrictions on travel, work, and residency for Africans across member states. While implementation has been slow, the protocol provides a framework for future reforms and signals a commitment to the principle of mobility. Some regional blocs have also made strides toward integration. The Economic Community of West African States, for example, has established a regional passport that allows citizens of member states to travel freely within the bloc. Similar initiatives exist in East and Southern Africa, though their reach and effectiveness vary. These successes, while limited, offer valuable lessons for the broader project of pan-African mobility. They demonstrate that progress is possible when countries work together, invest in shared infrastructure, and prioritize the needs of their citizens. They also highlight the importance of political leadership and public support in driving change. But for every success story, there are countless examples of missed opportunities and stalled reforms. The AU passport, launched with great optimism in 2016, remains out of reach for most Africans, including many leaders. The reasons are both practical and political: lack of infrastructure, limited funding, and persistent fears about security and sovereignty. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exacerbated these vulnerabilities. As countries closed their borders and imposed new restrictions, the dream of free movement receded even further. The pandemic also highlighted the importance of robust, interoperable systems for managing mobility, as governments struggled to track travelers, verify credentials, and coordinate public health responses. Looking ahead, the path to true unity will require more than just new documents or digital tools. It will demand a fundamental shift in mindset, a willingness to see mobility not as a threat, but as an opportunity. It will require leaders to put aside narrow interests and embrace the vision of a continent that is greater than the sum of its parts. This vision is not just the preserve of politicians or diplomats. It is being championed by a new generation of Africans who see mobility as a right, not a privilege. Young people across the continent are demanding easier access to education, work, and cultural exchange. They are pushing for reforms that will allow them to travel, learn, and build connections beyond their national borders. Surveys show that African youth are among the most vocal advocates for pan-African mobility. They understand that the future of the continent depends on its ability to harness the talents and aspirations of its people. They are calling for expanded vocational training, scholarships, and safer migration pathways. They are challenging the old narratives of division and exclusion and insisting on a new model of unity and opportunity. Their voices are being heard, but progress remains slow. The barriers to mobility are deeply entrenched, rooted in history, politics, and economics. Overcoming them will require sustained effort, creative thinking, and a willingness to learn from both successes and failures. To deepen our understanding, let's explore several regional case studies that reveal both the promise and the pitfalls of Africa's mobility ambitions. West Africa stands out as a region where integration has made tangible progress. The ECOWAS passport, introduced in 2000, allows citizens of member states to travel visa-free within the region. This has facilitated not only diplomatic engagement, but also trade, cultural exchange, and family reunification. According to ECOWAS reports, intra-regional trade has grown steadily and the movement of people has become more fluid. However, challenges remain. Border closures due to security concerns, outbreaks of disease, or political disputes can quickly undermine these gains. In 2020, the closure of borders between Nigeria and its neighbors disrupted trade and stranded thousands, highlighting the fragility of even the most advanced regional agreements. In East Africa, the East African community has made strides toward integration through the introduction of the EAC passport and the gradual removal of internal borders. Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and Tanzania have all committed to easing travel restrictions for citizens of member states. The EAC passport, launched in 2017, is a biometric document designed to facilitate movement and enhance security, yet implementation has been uneven. Some countries have been slow to adopt the new passport, and political tensions occasionally flare up, leading to temporary restrictions on movement. Despite these setbacks, the EAC remains a model for other regions, demonstrating the benefits of collective action and shared infrastructure. Southern Africa presents a more complex picture. The Southern African Development Community has long discussed the possibility of a regional passport, but progress has been slow. Member states have prioritized national security and economic interests, often at the expense of regional integration. South Africa, the region's economic powerhouse, maintains strict visa requirements for many African countries, citing concerns about illegal migration and security. This has created friction with neighbors and limited the potential for deeper integration. Nevertheless, there are signs of change. Botswana, Namibia, and Zambia have taken steps to liberalize their visa policies, offering visa-free or visa-on-arrival access to citizens of several African countries. These initiatives, while modest, signal a willingness to experiment with new approaches to mobility. North Africa faces its own set of challenges. The region's proximity to Europe and the Mediterranean migration crisis have shaped its approach to border management. Countries like Morocco and Tunisia have invested in biometric systems and digital border controls, often in partnership with European agencies. While these measures have improved security and streamlined travel for some, they have also created new barriers for others, particularly sub-Saharan Africans seeking to move northward. The legacy of colonial borders, ethnic divisions, and political instability continues to complicate efforts to harmonize travel policies across the region. Central Africa remains the most fragmented region in terms of mobility. The economic and monetary community of Central Africa has made limited progress toward integration, with member states maintaining strict visa requirements and border controls. Political instability, armed conflict, and weak governance have hindered efforts to build shared infrastructure or harmonize policies. As a result, both leaders and ordinary citizens face significant obstacles when attempting to travel within the region. These regional variations underscore the complexity of Africa's mobility landscape. While some areas have made impressive strides, others lag behind, hampered by historical divisions, security concerns, and lack of resources. The challenge for the African Union is to bridge these gaps, fostering a sense of shared purpose while respecting the diversity of member states. To further illustrate the human impact of these policies, let's return to the stories of those caught in the crossfire. In 2019, a delegation of African ministers was denied entry to a regional summit in a neighboring country due to last-minute changes in visa requirements. The incident sparked outrage and highlighted the fragility of diplomatic protocols. In another case, a prominent West African official was forced to wait for hours at a border post because his biometric data could not be verified by the receiving country's system. These stories, while anecdotal, are emblematic of the broader challenges facing the continent. But it's not just officials who suffer. Young entrepreneurs seeking to attend business conferences, students hoping to study abroad, and families separated by borders all face similar hurdles. According to a 2023 survey by Afrobarometer, nearly half of African youth cited travel restrictions as a major barrier to pursuing opportunities outside their home countries. Many expressed frustration at the slow pace of reform and called for greater investment in digital infrastructure and education to support mobility. The economic consequences of these barriers are profound. The African Development Bank estimates that intra-African trade could increase by up to 52% if mobility restrictions were lifted and border procedures streamlined. This would translate into billions of dollars in additional economic activity, new jobs, and improved living standards across the continent. Yet, progress remains slow, hampered by competing interests and lack of coordination. Observers from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa have noted that the cost of inaction is especially high for landlocked countries, which depend on access to ports and regional markets. For these nations, efficient cross-border movement is not a luxury, but a necessity. Borders, inconsistent visa policies, and lack of harmonized documentation can add days or even weeks to the movement of goods and people, driving up costs and undermining competitiveness. The political consequences are equally significant. Limited mobility undermines Africa's ability to speak with one voice on the global stage. When leaders are unable to attend summits, negotiate agreements, or build alliances, the continent's influence is diminished. This has real-world implications for issues ranging from climate change and trade negotiations to peacekeeping and security cooperation. To address these challenges, the African Union and its partners have launched a series of initiatives aimed at promoting mobility and integration. The AU's Digital Transformation Strategy, adopted in 2020, calls for the development of interoperable digital ID systems, e-passports, and secure data-sharing platforms. The goal is to create a seamless, continent-wide infrastructure that supports both security and mobility. Policy experts argue that successful implementation will require not only investment in technology, but also political will and public support. According to Dr. Amina Ahmed, a leading scholar on African integration, the real challenge is not technical but political. We need leaders who are willing to take risks, build trust, and put the interests of the continent above narrow national concerns. Some countries are already experimenting with innovative solutions. Rwanda, for example, has invested heavily in digital ID systems and border management technology, making it one of the most open and efficient countries in the region. Ghana has introduced an e-visa system that streamlines the application process and reduces waiting times. These efforts, while promising, need to be scaled up and replicated across the continent to have a meaningful impact. International partners also have a role to play. The European Union, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank have all provided funding and technical assistance for mobility projects. However, some experts caution that external involvement must be carefully managed to avoid the pitfalls of dependency and ensure that African priorities remain at the forefront. As we look to the future, several key questions remain. Will African leaders find the courage and consensus needed to break down the remaining barriers to mobility? Can the continent build the digital and physical infrastructure required to support seamless movement? Will young people continue to push for change, or will frustration give way to apathy? The answers to these questions will shape not only the future of African diplomacy, but also the continent's prospects for economic growth, social cohesion, and global influence. The stakes could not be higher. Let's now turn to the perspectives of African youth who represent both the present and the future of the continent. According to a 2024 survey by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, over 60% of Africans are under the age of 25. This demographic bulge presents both opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, young people are more connected, more mobile, and more ambitious than previous generations. On the other hand, they face significant barriers to realizing their potential, including high unemployment, limited access to education, and, of course, restricted mobility. Many young Africans see the ability to move freely across the continent as essential to their aspirations. As one Nigerian student put it in a recent interview, "We are Africans before we are Nigerians, Ghanaians, or South Africans. We want to learn from each other, work together, and build a future that is not limited by borders." This sentiment is echoed by youth leaders across the continent, who have called for the full implementation of the AU's Free Movement Protocol and greater investment in education and skills development. At the same time, there is a growing recognition that mobility must be managed responsibly. Concerns about brain drain, security, and social cohesion are real and must be addressed through thoughtful policy and inclusive dialogue. As one Kenyan entrepreneur observed, we need to balance openness with responsibility. Mobility should be a tool for development, not a source of instability. The role of technology in shaping the future of mobility cannot be overstated. Advances in biometric identification, digital passports, and e-visa systems have the potential to revolutionize the way Africans move across the continent. However, these technologies also raise important questions about privacy, data security, and access. Ensuring that all Africans, regardless of income or location, can benefit from these innovations will require sustained investment and careful regulation. The African Union has recognized these challenges and is working to develop a comprehensive framework for digital identity and mobility. The AU's Digital ID initiative aims to provide every African with a secure, portable, and universally recognized form of identification by 2030. If successful, this could lay the foundation for a truly borderless Africa, where both leaders and citizens can move freely and safely. However, progress will depend on the willingness of member states to cooperate and share data. Trust is a critical ingredient, and building it will require transparency, accountability, and respect for individual rights. As Dr. Ahmed notes, integration is not just about infrastructure or policy. It's about building a sense of shared destiny and mutual respect. To further deepen our understanding, let's examine the interplay between Africa's internal mobility challenges and its external diplomatic relationships. The continent's visa and border policies are not created in a vacuum. They are shaped by a history of external pressures, reciprocal restrictions, and global perceptions. For example, the United States and European Union have imposed travel bans, visa freezes, and additional requirements on citizens from dozens of African countries. In response, some African nations have adopted reciprocal measures, creating a cycle of restriction that affects not only ordinary citizens but also high-level officials. This dynamic has real consequences for Africa's diplomatic agency. When African leaders are unable to attend international summits or negotiate agreements in person, the continent's voice is diminished in global forums. According to a 2024 report by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Africa's relatively low rankings in global soft power indices are directly linked to these mobility constraints. The inability to project influence, build alliances, and shape narratives on the world stage is not simply a matter of resources, but of access. The impact is also felt in regional security and peacekeeping efforts. Africa's ability to coordinate responses to crises, whether related to conflict, health, or climate, depends on the rapid movement of officials and resources across borders. Delays caused by visa requirements, documentation issues, or lack of harmonized systems can undermine the effectiveness of these efforts, with consequences that ripple far beyond the continent. Let's also consider the economic implications for specific sectors. The tourism industry, for example, has enormous potential to drive growth and create jobs, but is hampered by restrictive visa regimes and inconsistent entry requirements. According to the African Development Bank, tourism accounts for nearly 8% of Africa's GDP, but growth is stifled by the very barriers that limit diplomatic travel. Similarly, the education sector suffers when students are unable to access scholarships or attend conferences due to bureaucratic hurdles. The private sector is not immune. Entrepreneurs and investors face significant obstacles when trying to establish cross-border businesses or attend trade fairs. The World Bank's 2023 Doing Business report highlights that African entrepreneurs spend more time and money navigating visa processes than their counterparts in any other region. This not only limits innovation, but also discourages investment and stifles job creation. The health sector provides another stark example. During the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, delays in the movement of health officials and supplies across borders contributed to the spread of the disease. The COVID-19 pandemic further exposed the weaknesses of Africa's mobility systems as countries struggled to coordinate public health responses and share vital information. In light of these challenges, some countries and regions are experimenting with new approaches. The African Union's Trusted Traveller platform, launched in partnership with the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, aims to streamline health documentation and facilitate safe cross-border movement. Early results are promising, but widespread adoption will require investment, training, and political commitment. Grassroots initiatives are also playing a role. Civil society organizations, youth groups, and advocacy networks are pushing for greater transparency, accountability, and public participation in the development of mobility policies. Their efforts are helping to shift the narrative from one of restriction to one of opportunity, and to build the public support needed for meaningful reform. The media has a critical part to play as well. By shining a light on the human impact of mobility barriers, journalists and storytellers can help to break down stereotypes, challenge misinformation, and foster a more informed and engaged public. This documentary is part of that effort, bringing together data, analysis, and personal stories to paint a fuller picture of Africa's mobility paradox. As we draw this investigation to a close, let's reflect on what's at stake. The issue of diplomatic passports and intra-African travel is about more than just paperwork or protocol. It is a litmus test for the continent's commitment to unity, integration, and shared prosperity. It is a measure of Africa's ability to overcome the legacies of the past and build a future that is open, dynamic, and inclusive. The story of Africa's borders is a story of both division and possibility. The same lines that once separated communities can, with vision and determination, become bridges to a new era of cooperation. The obstacles are real, but so too is the potential for transformation. The path forward will not be easy. It will require difficult conversations about sovereignty, security, and identity. It will demand investment in infrastructure, technology, and human capital. It will call for leadership that is bold, inclusive, and accountable. But the rewards are immense. A continent where leaders and citizens can move freely is a continent that can trade, innovate, and compete on the global stage. It is a continent that can harness the full potential of its people and chart its own course in the world. So, as we look to the future, the question is not whether Africa can achieve the dream of seamless mobility, but how and when it will do so. The answers will depend on the choices made by leaders, the demands of citizens, and the willingness of all Africans to imagine a different kind of future. Before we end, if you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in Africa's story and its future. We want your voice in this conversation. What do you see as the strongest force shaping Africa's future sovereignty, accountability, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts below, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's keep building this community of thinkers and changemakers together.